The cross has always been a tragedy beyond Sophocles and beyond Shakespeare, because no one can ever expect to see a God who dies on the cross. Neither Islamic theology, nor Hindu theology, nor any other religion would ever want to worship a God who died on the cross. And that is why the cross has always held humanity in awe. No one seemed to have understood why God would want to die on a cross. And that is precisely the God whom we worship, whom we welcome into our lives, Jesus, the Son of the Father. Now, the disciples who had followed Jesus for 3 years, who became part of his intimate plan for salvation, abandon Jesus when the time of the cross arrives, when his suffering begins, when his rejection by the Jewish hierarchy as well as the Roman political authorities begins. And that's when precisely the real tragedy of the cross as well begins. I would call it tragedy coupled with mystery, because God dying on the cross is and always will be a mystery. Shusaku Endo, a Japanese writer who became Christian, in his book Silence, says the biggest mystery about Jesus and about Christianity is that Jesus is ready to forgive all those who have put him on the cross. And this is what we see at the final moment of Jesus' life. Forgiving so many people who have hurt him, who have betrayed him, who have been responsible for putting him on the cross. While at the same time, the tragedy really begins at Gethsemane, when Jesus cries out to the Father saying, "Father, if it is possible, save me from this chalice, but may not my will, but your will be done." And so Jesus, as the beginning of the mystery of the cross, puts his life completely in the Father's hands and is ready to fulfill the Father's will. And the Father's will is that Jesus died on the cross and as a consequence prepare all his disciples, his followers, humanity to be saved through the cross. So the cross, which was a symbol of slavery, which was a symbol of humiliation, becomes a symbol of redemption and a symbol of victory through Jesus. And if we look at the various personalities who were at the foot of the cross, the first thing Jesus does on the cross is asking the Father to forgive all those who have put him on the cross. The Jews, the Romans, the soldiers, and all those who have betrayed him in the process. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Then he thinks about his disciples who are going to be alone, who are going to have to begin a new mission, the mission that has been entrusted by him directly to the disciples. And so he does not want the disciples to be alone, and he says to John, who represents all the other apostles, he says, "Behold your mother," and to Mary he says, "Behold your son." So he ensures that his mother has a home where she can go, and ensures that the disciples, the apostles, have a mother as well. So he takes care of his mother, he takes care of his apostles as well. One particular characteristic of the cross is the total loneliness and solitude in which Jesus begins his way of the cross. It's not I who call it the way of the cross, but it's tradition that calls it the way of the cross. Via Crucis in Latin, because that way to Golgotha has been called Via Dolorosa or Via Crucis. Via Dolorosa because the entire way that Jesus walked bearing the cross becomes a painful way, a way of suffering, a way of pain. But that is eventually to be transformed into a way of salvation. And this is what the way of the cross is all about. If we look into the merits of the way of the cross, which is also called the Stations of the Cross, right from the early Christianity, I think around the 7th or 8th century, there were attempts to portray the Via Dolorosa in various other parts of the world. Because the Via Dolorosa was considered the way to salvation. And so, this Via Dolorosa was portrayed in various parts of Italy, particularly in Bologna, but also in the New World, in the US, Canada, and other countries. The Franciscans, through St. Francis of Assisi, were given the custody of the Holy Land and of all the holy sites that were connected in some way, directly or indirectly, to the cross. And this was in the 13th century. Later, in the 16th century, we see the Franciscans taking a real concrete step to portray the way of the cross. And around 16th, 17th century is when this becomes concrete, and they say that roughly there were about 7 to 30 stations. Then in the 18th century, and towards the end of the 18th century rather, this becomes real concrete, and it was decided that there was to be 14 stations of the cross. 14 stations that constituted the way of the cross, the Via Crucis. And so, all through the season of Lent, but also throughout the year, the liturgical year, Christians, particularly Catholics, but also the Lutherans and Anglicans, embark on this Via Crucis. They wish to follow Jesus in the way of the cross, accompanying Jesus in the way of the cross, and so asking for salvation for themselves and for all their dear ones through the way of the cross. So what has been portrayed in this video is what has been portrayed by the youth of our parish, the parish of the Mother of God in Trichy, Samayapuram, quite south of Chennai, 330 kilometers south of Chennai. Boys who were mostly belonging to rural background got together under the leadership of our deacon, Brother Belgium, and they decided to make an attempt to portray for the people of this parish community the way of the cross. And I would give credit not to one particular of these boys, but to all these boys, because the passion with which they embarked on this journey of the Via Crucis, of the way of the cross, is really remarkable. And the expressions, maybe of the expressions of the boys are not so professional, but that attempt and the eventual portrayal of the way of the cross, the agony of Jesus, the solitude of Jesus, the betrayal of Jesus, and the pain and suffering of Jesus, not only physical but also psychical and spiritual, were, I think, sufficiently portrayed. So as you all watch this video, I wish that you all make a biblical and theological journey more than just devotional journey, so that you realize and live with faith this journey of the way of the cross, so that eventually in your life as well it becomes the way of salvation, the Via Lucis, the way of the resurrection. Amen.